All right, first day of the Civil War unit, so here we go. We're going to talk about specifically the state of Tennessee and when Tennessee chooses to secede and join the Confederate States of America. So here we go. Monday riddle real quick. What has a head, a tail, is brown, and has no legs? Hopefully you know that's a penny. If not, it's a penny. So here's your bell work. I want you to think about the term nullification, which comes from the word nullify, and I want you to use it in a sentence that proves that you understand what it means. Take some time to do that. Good example would be the state of Tennessee believes in nullification, that it can nullify or cancel a federal law, something like that. So here's a standard we're looking at. Explain the geographical division of Tennessee over the issue of slavery and secession. So how the state is divided geographically over this problem. We'll talk about Governor Harris, the secession convention vote of 1861, anti-secession efforts, and Scott County. So basically, you got these 5 questions. How was Tennessee divided over the issue of secession or slavery? What were Governor Harris's views? What were the results of the convention? How did some Tennesseans resist secession, and why did Scott County declare independence? So let's talk about that bell work for a second. Let's review the idea of nullification. What is nullification? Nullification is the idea that states have the right to cancel a federal law. Okay? So if nullification is true, if states have the right to cancel a federal law, well then, which is more powerful, the state or the federal government? Yeah, if a state can cancel a federal law, then that makes the states more powerful. And what would be some issues with that? Well, it's hard to govern a nation if the states can do whatever they want to. It might be hard to keep the nation together. And then also there's the issue of the Constitution. And the Constitution, in what's called the Supremacy Clause, we've looked at this before, the Constitution says the power to decide about federal laws belongs only to the federal government. Okay, so that means, can states nullify federal law? No. They can only be nullified or canceled by the federal government. So based on this, if the federal government is the only one allowed to stop laws, do we live in a nation or do we live in a confederation? Remember, a confederation is a pie that's divided into pieces, where the states are more powerful. A nation is a pie that's whole, where the federal government is more powerful. So do we live in a nation or a confederation? We live in a nation. And if we live in a nation, do states have the right to secede? Do they have the right to leave the nation? No. No, they don't have that right. They're not powerful enough to do that. But my question is that going to stop anyone? Just because they're not technically supposed to doesn't mean they're not going to try anyway. And that's kind of what leads us into the American Civil War. The southern states are angry, and so they're going to secede. Do they legally have that right? No. But does that stop them? No. So who will secede from the Union? So before spring break, we talked about the battle or the bombing of Fort Sumter. That happens in South Carolina. Take a look at this map. Before the bombing of Fort Sumter ever happens, these are the states that secede: South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. They all secede from the Union before a shot is fired, before any blood is spilled. After Fort Sumter, Arkansas, our state of Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia. So those border states decide after the Battle of Fort Sumter. So today we're talking about Tennessee specifically, so let's go ahead and dive in. Tennessee is the last state to secede. Of all of the states that leave the country and join the Confederate States of America, we are the last, okay? And it's because Tennessee was very divided over whether or not they wanted to join the Confederate States of America. So take a look at this map. This is a map of a vote of whether or not they would secede in 1861, the month of February. This map is from before the Battle of Fort Sumter, okay? So if you look at it, blue are the counties that opposed secession, the counties that wanted to stay in the United States. Gray are the counties that wanted to secede and join the Confederacy. So you'll see Memphis down here wanted to secede. Nashville, Knoxville, they wanted to stay. Now that's the vote before the Battle of Fort Sumter. Remember, Tennessee doesn't really make up its mind until after. So Governor Harris, he's the governor of the state of Tennessee, and he was from West Tennessee. He's from this region. So based on this graphic, what would he have wanted to do? Would he want to secede or would he want to stay in the Union? All right, so yeah, he is going to want to secede. So this next picture I'm going to show you is another vote from June. This is after the Battle of Fort Sumter. This map is before, this is after. Before, after. Well, all of a sudden, most of the state wants to secede, and so Tennessee leaves the Union. Now, what changed their minds? After the Battle of Fort Sumter, it becomes clear that we're going to war, and they do not want to fight other Southerners. They do not want to fight against people from Mississippi, people from Georgia, people from Virginia, and so they secede because they're Southerners first and Americans second. They don't want to fight other Southerners, okay? So after the Battle of Fort Sumter, Tennessee does vote to secede. So this is the secession vote of 1861. Looking at this, which regions in Tennessee voted to secede? Let's start with West Tennessee. Do they vote to secede or to stay? They're mostly gray, so they vote to secede. Let's look at Middle Tennessee. Do they vote to secede or stay? Yeah, they vote to secede. What about East Tennessee? East Tennessee votes to stay, but they get overruled. So Tennessee does vote to separate. They vote to secede after the Secession Convention of 1861. Now, there are a lot of counties in East Tennessee that refuse to support the South. They may have been outvoted, but they're still against joining the Confederacy. So they actually send troops to fight for the Union. So Tennessee as a state is pretty divided here. And Scott County, which is right here, Scott County is so upset about this vote, they refuse to join the state of Tennessee, and they declare themselves an independent state. So Tennessee secedes from the nation, and then the county of Scott secedes from Tennessee. So they secede from the state, and they become their own little independent area until after the American Civil War is over. So you see there's a lot of people in eastern Tennessee who are not huge fans of the South and do not support it. So June 1861, Tennessee is officially the last state to join the Confederate States of America. Now let's talk about some important people. That word, that's people. Let's talk about some important people from Tennessee. We're just going to go through a bunch of them. Sam Watkins is the first guy I want you to know. Behind him here, this is the Confederate battle flag. So that lets us know he's on the side of the Confederacy. He's a Confederate. Sam Watkins was a wealthy private for the South, which means he's just a low-ranking soldier. And he writes a book about his experiences in his book called Company H, which was the name of his unit. It was H Company, and so he spelled it out there. And here's a quote from him. He says, "But we soon found out that the glory of war was at home among the ladies and not upon the field of blood and carnage of death, while our comrades were mutilated and torn by shot and shell." And this kind of represents how a lot of Southerners felt about the war. They were excited to go to war. They thought it was going to be this glorious experience, and then they got there and they experienced the horrors of watching their friends and their co-soldiers die in front of them and be torn apart by these new weapons that they were using. And he says he realized that war was awful and that, in fact, it wasn't glorious at all. And so Sam Watkins' book, Company H, you need to know those two things. His book, Company H, is really a journal. And it's used to give us a a firsthand account of what the war was really like and what soldiers in the war experienced. So that's Sam Watkins, Company H. He's a Confederate soldier. Next up, we got Sam Davis. So Sam Davis is a private for the South, also just a low-ranking soldier. He's from an upper-class family in Tennessee, so he's a wealthy guy. And he was a spy. And he's captured and he's executed. And so in his last speech before dying, he says, "Sir, if you think that I'm that kind of a man," the kind of man who would give away enemy secrets, "you have missed your mark. I would rather die 1,000 deaths than betray a friend or be false to duty." And that kind of represents how people in the South felt about this war. The Southerners were very big about honor, very big about reputation. And so they would rather die 1,000 deaths than betray their state. So they're going to fight long and hard to win their independence from the United States. And that's a good kind of insight into what the average Southerner felt like. So that's Sam Davis, another Confederate soldier. It's a Confederate general, General Nathan Bedford Forrest. Nathan Bedford Forrest, in the last 5 or 6 years, his popularity in history has shifted. Used to be for a while, people liked this guy a lot. They respected him. He was involved in the railroad. He helped make Memphis a profitable city. General Nathan Bedford Forrest was a wealthy slave trader. He's famous. He's a cavalry officer, so he and his men would ride around on horses and slip behind enemy lines and destroy supply lines and tear up railroads and things like that. And he's got a quote here that says, "Come on, boys, if you want a heap of fun and to kill some Yankees." Yankees refer to people of the North, and that's the kind of guy he was. He was a charismatic leader. He is probably most well known in history today for being a founding member of the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan is also known as the KKK. It's a white supremacist group, and he helps to create it. Later on, he realizes that he was wrong to do so, and he basically says that it's a terrible organization, people should leave, and it should die. But it's too late, because the damage has already been done. And he's already created this white supremacy group that is known as a hate group and a terrorist group. And so that has basically affected the way people view him, and rightfully so. We are judged by our actions. And so that's one reason that we need to be so careful to make good choices and to lead good lives, because some decisions haunt you for a long time, and we know that in our culture today. People are judged for what they've done and what they've committed in the past, and sometimes those mistakes are so great that they can never quite be made up for. And this is his. This colors who he is 100%. So that's Nathan Bedford Forrest. You need to know about him. All right, this is our first United States guy. This is David Farragut. David Farragut is the first admiral for the United States Navy, and he captures New Orleans for the North during the war. You'll learn about why that's so significant in a couple days. And the quote from him is, "Conquer or be conquered." When he captures New Orleans, it cuts off the South's trade because they no longer can use the Mississippi River. And that kind of tips the scales in favor of the Union. So that's David Farragut. He's a Union general. William Brownlow, also a Union guy. He's a pro-Union newspaper editor and minister. So during the Civil War, he writes and speaks out against the South. And because of that, he's run off. The Confederacy actually chase him out of town, and he has to run to the North to survive. And so this is a quote from him in one of his newspapers. He says, "I know the origin of the rebellion, and I know the originators, and nothing short of fire and brimstone will reward them adequately for their services." I hope you catch his drift with what he's talking about, fire and brimstone. He's saying the people that rebel, he's speaking real strongly here. He says people that have rebelled against the nation, well, where should they go to spend eternity? someplace where it's fiery and there's brimstone. Hope you can read between the lines there. Now, what's interesting is after the Civil War, William Brownlow will become the governor of Tennessee. That's after the war. So William Brownlow, pro-Union newspaper editor, speaks out against the South. He's chased off, and then after the war, he comes back and is made the governor. So these questions you got to be able to answer. How was Tennessee divided over the issue of slavery? Well, Middle Tennessee and West Tennessee wanted to secede. East Tennessee didn't. Governor Harris, he's from West Tennessee, so he wanted to secede. The results of the secession convention vote, Tennessee does secede. It's the last state to do so. How did some Tennesseans resist? Well, you got to talk about David Farragut. You got to talk about William Brownlow. You got to talk about the county of Scott and how it declares independence. Why do they do that? Question 5, they do that because they don't want to secede from the United States. And so that allows them to stay as a part of the Union. So read chapter 14, lesson 1 with the time remaining. There's plenty of time to do so. Best of luck to you. See you next time.